Say the thing you think you cannot say is really about something I've learned in my career. They keep having the same pattern. And why don't you stop and say, can I share an observation with you? Does it feel like you faced something like this before? And watch, because I asked it in the form of a question, because that makes it less scary to James. Hey, I'm curious. It seems like this is happening. Am I wrong? Am I right? And people will get energized because often they're waiting for someone to notice. Be the person who notices. That's what that's about.
And they just have not, some of them have not scaled up. I'm starting to think about potentially managing them out. How do I have this conversation?
テクノロジーの力で日本から世界を変える、そんな起業家の方からのご連絡をお待ちしております。概要欄の URL からお問い合わせください。
Speaking of angry or triggers for getting angry, in the book you also talk about say the thing you think you cannot say.
Yeah.
At Coral, actually, we have our 360 activity where we're actually giving basically all of us feedback in real time. So it's a very relevant, top of mind thing for us. But what does this mean to you?
I'm dying to hear how that works, where you're all giving...
It's kind of like the Netflix one. It was in No Rules, but you don't read business books, so I don't think you know about it.
I've read the culture deck from
Okay,
Netflix.
yes.
But yeah, so say the thing you think you cannot say is really about something I've learned in my career, which is I care a lot about impact. I care a lot about positive impact. Like, let's move the needle. Let's move the ball down the field. And I realize, like, you're in a room, whether it's a virtual room or an actual room, and like every interaction you have, every meeting, everything with a customer, you have an opportunity to make that thing have an impact. And often we don't. Often we don't say the thing that is going to move the needle because it's often feels risky to point out, hey, I think we have a problem, or hey, this data looks off, or hey, it seems like you guys aren't getting along and that project is suffering. And I was like, why am I there even? Like, I'm on a lot of boards right now, and I sit there and I'm listening for hours, and I'm like, the most valuable thing I can do right now is make an observation that no one is making. And so this has also reinforced it since I wrote the book. I'm like, this really does matter. So, and it's also true for feedback. So you're with an employee and they're talking to you about a problem, and in your mind, you're thinking something like, oh my God, I can't believe they have this problem again. They keep having the same pattern. And why don't you stop and say, hey, James, can I share an observation with you? Does it feel like you faced something like this before? And watch, because I asked it in the form of a question, because that makes it less scary to James. What do you mean? I'm like, well, this sounds a lot like last month when you had that issue with getting the marketing campaign out the door. Really? I'm like, yeah, I'm wondering. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to go up above the conversation and notice a pattern, but share it with you. Because if I don't share it with you, all I'm doing is sitting there judging you and thinking increasingly that you're a bad performer. Instead of saying to you, you seem to have a pattern, I'm observing it, and I wonder if we can work on it. And you're going to maybe come to the table or you're not. But hopefully by being curious, by noticing it, by sharing what I've seen, you are going to say, I could maybe work on that. I need your help, right? And so like say the thing is, and it's not as scary as it feels when you're having that voice in your head in the room, especially if you sort of frame what you're seeing constructively or as an observation. Hey, I'm curious. It seems like this is happening. Am I wrong? Am I right? And people will get energized because often they're waiting for someone to notice. Be the person who notices. That's what that's about.
Right.
Take the risk, because why else are you there?
So yes. At the same time, we're in Japan, where culturally, it's a bit more challenging to speak up, and so how does this translate when it comes to like cross-border management? Because Stripe was, the ambitions were global from day one, as I understand it. So I'm sure that you experienced some friction depending on what culture you're expanding the company into.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking to an early Stripe earlier today about, I found this work by this, I think it's like an anthropologist named Geert Hofstede. It's cited in the book about like 9 indicators of cultural differences. And they're very interesting. Like, does the culture tend to use I more or use we? Is it more consensus driven or authoritarian? Is it more female energy or male energy? And you can interpret that however you will, but not in a gendered way as much as a sort of, a certain forward energy versus a certain listening, receiving energy. And the point is, I was like, I'm going to make this culture understanding training for the people who are building our offices around the world that I called site leads. And we built this whole program around it. And so we took the Geert Hofstede factors and everyone sat and like ranked, by the way, the US and then Stripe. Stripe is not very US company like. I mean, it's founded by 2 Europeans, right?
That's true.
And then I had everyone write the culture factors for their markets. So then let's compare your market to the US to Stripe. And then let's talk about where there's differences and what we're going to do about it. And it was it was taking some risks, right? Because anything like that, you're sort of categorizing, people feel a little stereotyped. But I think if you can't, again, say the thing you think you cannot say, you can't have the real conversation about, well, when I'm leading Stripe Japan, I have to do some adaptation, but I want to stay true to our core sort of cultural fabric and foundation. How do I do that? And you actually get into really tactical choices you might make about, how you do business or how do you encourage, by the way, open dialogue in the office? Even if culturally you're hiring a lot of people who may not be used to working somewhere where everyone's like, you need to speak up. And I think you can create things that are outside of the culture you're in if you're very intentional about it. You recognize the culture you're in, and then you say, as you know, James, I have an expression like make the implicit explicit. If you say, I realize this is culturally more normal where we operate, but what I am going to do now is something that's different, and here's why. Or this company is going to be different, and here's why. Like you can get yourself, you're not going to completely change the culture you're in, but you can create a window around, like through it, where you can get people comfortable with some difference. So that's the main thing I would say. I think in the sort of reality is, yes, in Japan, people are going to be maybe a little less likely to speak up and say the thing they think they can't say. Frankly, in the US too, like there's power dynamics in every room. And I am asking people to take some risks. And it'd be better, you could take those risks more if the leader sets the example and says, hey, I haven't heard from you, Jim. Like they invite people. Not every leader is going to do that. But I really, really do think, I guess I would ask you all to be empathetic here. But if you're a leader in a room, I don't care what country you're in, and you're talking about a business problem that the team, and you've been invited into the room. You may be a junior employee, but you're in there for a reason. And you're talking about a business problem. And you are the person who says, asks a question and says, is it possible that we haven't thought of X? And the leader's sitting there and you just help them see something they hadn't seen. They are glad, right?
Definitely.
So you took a risk and you did it constructively and respectfully, hopefully. Even if in the moment they look a little shocked, they are going to go home that night and say, wow, thank God that junior employee brought up the thing I had been missing. And they will notice you for the rest of your career. And so that's what I would just remind people that, like, yeah, you're taking a risk, but you're going to be the one that gets remembered. I remember once I got feedback. I was often, especially in my consulting career, the only woman in the room with a lot of our clients and my team and my boss. And my boss said, he took me aside, but as you can tell, I'm not afraid to speak. But he took me aside and he said, I think you know this, but I want you to understand when you speak in a meeting, because you are different and you sound different and you look different than the rest of the people in the meeting, they are listening more to what you're saying.
Interesting.
And he said, so choose really wisely because you will probably have a bigger impact in the room than the rest of us. And that is a real flip for diversity thinking that I've carried with me the rest of my career. And I say that to junior employees too. And I was like, if you take the risk, people will really notice. And if you're smart and you do the work and you add value, it actually will be an accelerator.
So I've scaled out the company. I've raised my Series B successfully. Everything is going amazing.
Doing great.
I mean, like
really
people said startups are hard. I don't know what they're talking about. And we just crossed 1,000 people.
You're interviewing a COO.
I'm interviewing a COO. Life is awesome, But there are some people in the organization that have been with me, since like under 30 employees.
Yeah.
And we're a very different company than we were 2 years ago. And they just some of them have not scaled up. And I'm starting to think about potentially managing them out, which is a very tough thing. Not only because I am very grateful to them, but also, they've been very loyal. They've contributed a lot.
Yeah.
How do I have this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, this is tough. This is real. I remember interviewing, again, going to outside experts. I interviewed a bunch of recruiting leaders when I was trying to build Stripe recruiting and hire a recruiting leader. So I was also recruiting some of the recruiting leaders. Is very meta. But one of them, who had been at Facebook early, said to me, the main thing of course, because I said, give me some general advice. You saw Facebook grow from X to X. He's like, is the ones who brought you to the dance aren't the ones you leave with. And he's like, and it's really hard. And I will also say, I do think there are some who do stay, and maybe they're not dancing the same way, but they're really valuable because your longest tenured employees become very, very important and valuable.
They're like the culture keepers in some sense.
In so many ways. But institutional knowledge, just product depth of knowledge, all of that. But if you've really reached a point where maybe you've tried to talk to them about changing roles or their scope, being slightly different, and you're like, okay, they do need to leave. And what does happen is some people who aren't scaling become toxic. They start to get cynical. And again, back to the idea of a blast radius, that actually can really permeate a team or an organization, and you need to get them out. And so managing people out I talk about it in the book. It's my preferred method. I don't want to have to fire people. Firing people is a pretty aggressive. And I know in some markets, I know Japan is one of them, it's not very easy to do. And depending on, a lot of regulations in certain markets around the world, you really just can't. But I would prefer to do it anyway because it's much more respectful and mutual if done well. And here is how I think about it, which is, again, going back to saying the thing you think you cannot say. People, again, let's think about just human first principles, want to be successful. They want to believe they're contributing and that they're doing so well and that they're adding value, right? All of these things. When I start to have a conversation with someone, one, they often know when they're not. So they're pretending they're fine, but they're not fine. They're going home at night. They're anxious. They can tell they're not contributing anymore at the same level. And they're feeling afraid they're going to get found out. You're going to have to trust me on this. So if you can get in a position where you open up the dialogue with someone, where you say, I feel like it's not going well. Like, I'm worried that you're not having the impact that you used to have. Like, I'm not sure. Like, what do you think of that? Super scary to open that dialogue, but super important. And a lot of times out of 10, not 9, but maybe 7 out of 10, the person is relieved. They won't initially show that. They will initially definitely look freaked out. But in their mind, they're like, I've been afraid this is true. And they've been going home at night knowing this is true. And they're like, they figured it out. But if you do this respectfully and you say, I want to talk about how you feel about that observation. Like, this is what I've seen. What do you think? And sometimes they say, I can't talk about this right now. Let's talk tomorrow. Whatever. You give them space. But often they'll come back and say, okay, well, what do we do? And I try to have a human-to-human dialogue about, well, we've tried a different role. Depending on the circumstance, I sort of say, well, I feel like I've been trying some things to help you. Maybe I haven't been explicit enough about it. And I love the phrase, I'm worried. It's like, I'm worried that it's not working and you're going to be more successful making a change. And that change may not be here.
That must hit hard.
Yeah, I think, but for people, sometimes they need to be set free. And you say, and what I like about managing out is I say, like, I'm not thinking it has to be like tomorrow. Like, I want to be in a dialogue with you about what you think you might want to do differently, like I'm happy. I mean, in some cases, you'd be happy to refer them to another company. Often the folks who are great early stage are so much happier going back to something earlier.
Yeah.
And you can use your network to help them. Like, but you have to start the conversation in order to do that. But to say, like, I'm here to help you. I want you to land well. I'll help you own your timeline. I'll help you own your communications about your departure. Very respectful. And I think it can be great. They often just need to process. You just need to give them some space to process it initially. Don't rush it. Don't drag it out. There's like a definitely Goldilocks thing here about how much time you give it. But I think over the course of a few weeks, most of the time, if you really are empathetic and listening and giving them a chance to respond, you can get it done. And sometimes you can't. And then you have to think about what are the other options we have.
I mean, one thing we witness at Coral is, there are just naturally, right? There are 0 to 1 people, there are 1 to 10 people, there are 10 to 100 people, and some people can bounce between the stages and some people can't.
That's right.
And the 10 to 100 person might not be great at 0 to 1, right? So it's very natural. And we've actually had people from our portfolio companies that have scaled up move to more early stage companies. Because they were great at that stage. And so we still think very, very highly of them. It's just that they didn't fit the later stage and vice versa, really, right? You know, the book is out. What would you change about the book? What would you update? What would you add to the book?
Well, first of all, I think the company building stuff will be different given over some time, not this second, but what we're seeing with AI tools. Certainly we're seeing in some eng productivity, certainly seeing in some customer support operational stuff. Not seeing, like, there's not an AI salesperson yet, but I think that the certain functions that I view as manual scale functions, so engineering is not. Engineering can be a function that has outsized without adding more people, depending on the quality of your engine, your developer environment. But certainly you just need to add more salespeople right now. And it used to be, I think you need to add more support people. And I think we're starting to see maybe you don't at the same rate. So I would add in, I think it's actually, on the one hand, great because some of the pressures of more people cause you to have to handle some of the scale challenges, obviously earlier than you're ready to. And so, yay. But I would just remind everyone that means the people you do have actually matter more.
To be excellent.
They need to be excellent. Because if we're using technology to amplify like 10x that one support person, they better be really good. So actually management is more important earlier, and talent identification, recognition, cultivation, retention of the good people. Like some of the stuff in the book actually becomes more critical. Anyway, so something to think about. So AI would have to be in there, sort of the idea of intelligent automation agents. It's moving so quickly. I think I'd have to rewrite that chapter 7 times. But the other is, as I talked about the book, as I did events like this, I've done a lot of them, podcasts, whatever. There's certain things I ended up talking more about that I wish I'd done more content on. There's a lot of interest in remote work, what's happening with hybrid work, how do you make it work, can it work? Probably there's some in there. I was finishing the book during COVID, but I could do a lot more on that. There's probably more on the executives not working out. That there's a section on it, but I'm like, again, there's different stages of company. Some of the stage of company stuff is starting to become more obvious to me. So I could probably temper some of the content with company stage. But the book is sort of long. I have this Harvard Business School professor friend who, if you want to get tenure, you publish a lot, like as a professor. And she's like, did you put it all in the one book? She's like, why not do multiple books? I was like, because I didn't want to write a book. So I wrote everything I had. So I don't think it would be that much longer. I don't have that much I left on the table.
Well, we certainly appreciate it.
Claire, James, thank you very much for a super insightful conversation.
Thank you to Coral Capital for hosting me.
Thank you so much for joining us.
For all of you for being here. Arigato gozaimasu.